Fears of a new global slump keeping interest rates here at record lows. The Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, says weak growth around the world means a rise won't happen for some time. The problem stems from China now growing at its slowest rate for 25 years.
Also tonight, new hope in the doctors' dispute. Next week's strike in England is off.
Where did it all go wrong? How and why Labour lost the election?
And game set, and I'm off. Murray's exit plan if the baby comes early.
Kim will message my team if anything's going on during the matches, and I'll see what happens.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
Good evening. In Britain and across the world, the economic temperature turned distinctly chillier today. The Governor of the Bank of England ruled out any early rise in interest rates because, he said, of worldwide economic turmoil and weakening growth here in the UK.
And once again, it's what's going on in China that's the problem. Just as its cheap exports are playing havoc with our steel industry, so its economic slowdown is causing much wider uncertainty here. In a moment, we'll report from China, but first our economics editor Richard Edgar reports on the Governor's warnings.
The global economy is in a bit of a spin. In fact, it's slowing a little, making these uncertain times. And yet only months ago, the Governor of the Bank of England had hinted he would be thinking of the first interest rate hike around the turn of the year. Today, he had a different message.
Well, the year has turned, and that decision proves straightforward. Now is not yet the time to raise interest rates.
And to drive the reassuring message home,
that means we will do the right thing at the right time on rates.
Welcome news for borrowers. The Governor set out 3 things that need to be in place before he'll consider raising rates, which the global picture has disturbed. Sustained growth in our economy. At the moment, it's growing but slowing. Inflation moving closer to the 2% target. Today, it was just 0.2%. And rising domestic costs, stripping out volatile things like food and oil, which we import from abroad. The prospect of interest rates staying flat for even longer, and they've already been at a record low for almost 7 years, is welcomed by businesses like this specialist printers in Middlesex.
When we're looking at things like capital expenditure and further investment into the company, confidence comes from statements like what Mr. Carney has made today, and that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to hear. Confidence,
that magical ingredient that seems to keep everything going. Investors are confident the first rate rise won't come before next year. Richard Edgar, ITV News.
So it's China's stuttering growth, at least by its standards, that's the big problem. The Chinese economy grew at 6.9% last year, a level most countries can only dream of. But it's China's slowest growth rate for a quarter of a century. Our business editor Joel Hills reports now from Hong Kong on the nervousness surrounding the world's second biggest economy.
In Hong Kong Harbour, there's still plenty of hustle and bustle. China's economy is slowing, but it's still growing, and at quite some pace. At this Jaguar Land Rover dealer, they've had to sharpen their sales pitch. Even at the luxury end of the market, cars have become harder to shift.
It is difficult, but if we build more cars here in China, then I'm confident we can keep prices down and appeal to more customers.
Look hard, and there are signs of distress. In Shenzhen, X marks the spot where a mobile phone factory closed down on Christmas Day. Nothing to see here? Perhaps. By British standards, Hong Kong is huge. 7 million people live here, and yet China has 14 cities which are even larger. Since 2008, while the West has been going through a period of belt-tightening austerity, China's been riding an investment boom. Skyscrapers, motorways, railways, power stations have been built, and they've been built using borrowed money. The anxiety is that China's debts are unsustainable. Today's stock markets rallied. The hope is that a financial crisis can be avoided.
I use the word lackluster, and the annual growth of 6.9 is the lowest since the year of 1990, but it is still 6.9. That's among the highest growth rate in the world.
China's attempt to rebalance its economy away from exports and towards consumer spending matters to Britain. Its ability to do so will affect the profits of our companies, as well as the prices we all pay and the money we earn. China's future looks highly uncertain. If you were a British business, you'd be crazy to come here at the moment.
I think not. There's been a lot of speculation about a hard landing, about some sort of crash. But the government in Beijing has got many more economic levers it can pull, many more economic policy buttons it can push.
China has cut interest rates 5 times in the last year, but the slowdown continues. These growth figures cause for some optimism, but the doubts haven't gone away. Joel Hills, ITV News in Hong Kong.
Well, back here, next week's planned 48-hour strike by junior doctors in England was suspended today. The turnaround coming as talks with the government continue over their new contract. Now, the news came with a warning that significant progress would be needed to avoid next month's all-out strike. Excuse me. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, is here. Now, this is a good sign, isn't it, despite this warning?
Yeah, very much so. It's my understanding from those close to the negotiations that this is more than just a brief respite, that real progress has been made in getting closer to a contract that both sides can agree on. Why is that? Well, there's been a change in the negotiating team for the NHS and the government to move away from the direct involvement of Jeremy Hunt's team. It's no secret the doctors view them as toxic to the process. And instead, they've brought in a very well-respected chief executive, Sir David Dalton, boss at the Royal Salford Hospital. And that is making a difference, I understand, because this is about how the government will be able to afford what they've promised, better care at weekends. Essentially, how much they can pay junior doctors, how many of their hours will be classed as overtime. The difference now is they're talking to somebody across the other side of the table who not only knows how hard they work, but also knows how much money there is in hospital budgets when it comes to actually being able to pay for those extra hours. So knows realistically how many of them will need to be classed as antisocial. Now, progress made here, but the strike that hospitals are really worried about, the one where emergency care is withdrawn next month, that does remain on the table. So more progress still to come, hopefully.
OK, fingers crossed. Rachel, thank you.
A family court judge today ruled that a 13-month-old girl had been sexually abused by her father before her death in 2012. Poppy Worthington was found at her home in Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria with serious injuries. She died later in hospital. Her father, Paul Worthington, was arrested and questioned but never charged. In a statement released today, he said he had never hurt his daughter. A second inquest will now take place.
A report said today that 3 clear chances to charge Lord Janner over child abuse allegations were missed because of blunders by police and prosecutors. Well, the Director of Public Prosecutions expressed sincere regret at the mistakes, words which a lawyer for the alleged victims called little consolation. Emma Murphy has the story.
He was the peer accused of paedophilia, a man who, according to his alleged victims, used a lifetime in public office to protect him from prosecution, and whose death last month denied them their search for justice. Now, just days after all legal proceedings were dropped, an independent review has confirmed that the chances to pursue Greville Janner in court years ago were missed.
He's led a very charmed life where all these missed opportunities have just gone, you know, and it just makes you wonder whether he was protected because of his position.
The independent report found that in 1991 there was enough evidence to charge Lord Janner with sexual offences, despite a police investigation described as inadequate. In 2002, in what was described as a remarkable failure, police didn't pass further allegations on to the Crown Prosecution Service. And in 2007, there was again sufficient evidence to prosecute, and the Independent Police Complaints Commission should investigate. Greville Janner was eventually charged last year with 22 indecent and serious sexual assaults on 9 people between 1968 and 1988. Those 9 are now considering legal action against the people who ignored them for so many decades. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
The Labour Party admitted today that the perception on the doorstep that Ed Miliband was not as strong as David Cameron was one of the reasons it lost last year's election. The party's own report also singled out a failure to convince voters on issues like the economy and benefits.
It came as another big report into the election was published into why the pollsters got the results so very wrong. Let's get more now from our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp.
It was the election result which surprised everyone.
It is now 10 o'clock and here's our exit poll.
Instead of a hung parliament as predicted, Britain had voted for a Conservative government. It surprised the Tories as much as Labour, but by the following morning the Labour leader had to announce it was all over. This is where Ed Miliband came on the morning after the election to admit that he'd lost. The Labour headquarters is now, as you can see, a building site. Today the party released its report into what went wrong.
The task we had was to try to convince people that they could trust us, particularly with the economy, and to deal with issues that the Conservatives have made issues of division between people, like welfare and immigration. And we weren't able to do that in the end.
Margaret Beckett also blamed what she called the fear peddled by the Tories of the SNP propping up a minority Labour government. And she blames Ed Miliband too, not judged as strong a leader as David Cameron, she wrote.
The Beckett report actually spoke to party activists who have all fed back what we were hearing on the doorstep anyway, was that actually, confidence in the leader, the economic credibility, but also the issues of fairness when it came to welfare and immigration were the big issues.
Labour's report came on the same day as an admission from polling companies that their election predictions were wrong. A review found pollsters spoke to more Labour supporters than Tory ones. Not enough older people were sampled, particularly online, even though they're more likely to vote. Meanwhile, many Labour sympathisers under 30 didn't turn up on the day when they had told the polls they would.
We're pretty confident that we got a good nationally representative sample, but actually then turning that into the electorate on the day, we needed to be better at doing that. We needed to be making more adjustments.
Looking at the polls at the time, Ed Miliband was hoping to take his infamous pledge stone to Downing Street, but neither he nor what became known as the Ed Stone made it there. Chris Shipp, ITV News, Westminster.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, why some black stars are now threatening to boycott the Oscars.
And father-to-be Andy Murray's dilemma down under as he begins his Australian title challenge. It's a tricky one. Those stories and more right after the break. Welcome back. Many parents enduring the tragedy of stillbirth end up suffering in silence, according to a major new report. And it says Britain is falling way behind other countries when it comes to prevention. The study says the deaths of 1 in 3 stillborn babies in Britain could be prevented if better care for pregnant women was provided. Richard Paller reports now on the human heartbreak that lies behind these figures.
Sorry. 4 years on, the pain of losing daughter Alexandra does not ease. Conceived through IVF, stillborn after a 12-hour labour. And with only photographs to show young Sasha, the sister she'll never meet.
It's the hardest thing that we've ever been through. To be handed your lifeless baby. And giving birth to your baby should be one of the happiest times of your life. And instead, all we were left with was trauma and pain and...
Every year in the UK, there are approximately 3,600 stillbirths. That is 1 in every 200 babies born here. It means the UK ranks only 21st in the world for the rate of stillbirths, behind the likes of Estonia, Poland and South Korea, not to mention Iceland at the top. What is perhaps most worrying is the rate of reduction in stillbirths. That is hardly falling at all in the UK, suggesting failures in care and the lessons from infant deaths are not being learnt.
The data that we do have from the UK show that between 1/3 and 2/3 of stillbirths happening in the richest countries have a health system avoidable factor.
The government has committed to reducing stillbirths by half in England by 2030, something these parents believe is entirely achievable, if not sooner.
Stillbirth is so dark, such a taboo subject. It gets ignored, it gets overlooked. cot death was worked at and studied, and the rate came down enormously. The same could happen for stillbirth.
And for Alexandra, there could be little better legacy. Richard Pallo, ITV News.
A heterosexual couple today began a landmark legal challenge about civil partnerships at the High Court. Rebecca Steinfeld and Charles Keaton were refused a civil partnership by Kensington and Chelsea Registry Office. They claim the government's decision to allow them for same-sex couples only is incompatible with equality law.
The Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, has launched a new website designed to help stop radicalisation in schools. She made the announcement at the Bethnal Green Academy in East London, which made headlines last year when 3 of its pupils fled to Syria.
Sainsbury's tonight recalled its own brand wholemeal bread after fragments of metal were found in some loaves. The retailer says the decision is a precaution and removed the bread from its shelves.
And a 13-year-old boy is being hailed a hero tonight after dragging 2 young children to safety when a hoverboard burst into flames. Jibril Mohammed Faris called the fire brigade when the board caught fire as it was charging at a friend's house in Bradford.
2 big Hollywood names stepped into the row over the all-white Oscar nominations today after no black acting names appeared on the list for the 2nd year in succession. The director Spike Lee and actress Jada Pinkett Smith both said they will boycott the ceremony. Robert Moore reports from the US on a growing controversy.
Bryan Cranston in Trumbo. Matt Damon in The Martian.
The nominations for the Oscars were striking for a simple reason. In all categories, not a single black actor emerged as a contender. For the 2nd consecutive year, Hollywood stands accused of institutional bias in how it hands out the industry's most prestigious awards.
I can tell something is wrong.
Film after film that featured black actors, like Concussion with Will Smith.
This is bigger than they are. They have to listen to us now.
And Creed with Michael B. Jordan were all snubbed by the Academy. It is Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, who took to social media to suggest a mass boycott of the Oscars next month.
Is it time that people of color recognize how much power, influence that we have amassed, that we no longer need to ask to be invited anywhere?
John, let's continue.
And even the Academy president describes herself as heartbroken and frustrated by the all-white acting nominations.
We're still working very hard and we'll continue to work hard to bring in more inclusion.
The essence of the problem may be the membership of the Academy, which is overwhelmingly white and elderly. For it is those members who vote for the Oscar nominees and the winners.
I'm Chris Rock and I'm hosting the Oscars.
But in an ironic twist, while the nominees lack diversity, not so the host. And Chris Rock is now under mounting pressure to take a stand himself. Robert Moore, ITV News, in the United States.
Finally, it was a good day for British tennis at the Australian Open, with our top woman player claiming the scalp of Venus Williams and Andy Murray safely through.
But it looks like Andy's found a new way of keeping us all on tenterhooks. As Ian Payne reports, if his wife goes into labour, he might just return home, even if the finals beckon.
Venus Williams was Johanna Konta's hero when Konta was a 12-year-old girl watching her on television. Well, today she not only met her hero, she beat her, and beat her emphatically.
Another unforced error.
In the second set, the Australian-born Konta, who acquired UK citizenship in 2012, was hardly troubled and won in just over an hour.
She's done it.
I was definitely nervous about just really wanting to play a good match out there. It's still very early in the season, so still finding our bearings, and yeah, no, the crowd was amazing.
The white-capped Andy Murray made it 2 British number ones into the second round with a straight sets victory over German teenager Alexander Zverev. The first 2 sets went Murray's way very easily.
No problems there.
The third was a much tighter affair, lasting as long as the first 2 put together. But again, Murray prevailed. But questions still remain about how long the Scotsman will stay in Australia. His wife Kim is due to give birth to their first child soon, and Murray says even if he's in the final,
he'll go home if he gets the call.
No, I'm just excited, looking forward to I don't have any news because I've just come off the court, so I'm hoping my phone hasn't been buzzing in my bag, but Kim will message my team if anything's going on during the matches, and I'll see what happens.
The finals on the 31st of January. His wife's due date is said to be, quote, sometime in February. Ian Payne, ITV News.
It's a 24-hour journey. Should have to be in labour.
Hold on,
sometime.
Kim. Hold on.
That's all for now. Tom Bradby's here at 10.
All the team. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.